My sister's kid spit on my birthday cake and said you don't deserve this. Everyone laughed, even after my mom told me maybe I should stop coming around. So I quietly walked away and put every bill, loan, and financial burden back where it belonged. By nightfall, their phones couldn't stop ringing. I was turning 34 the day everything started to unravel. My name's Dale, and for most of my life, I've been the kind of guy who avoids conflict. You know, the type at family gatherings, does the dishes without being asked, helps out when people need something, even when they forget to say thank you. For years, I told myself that being the nice one would keep the peace. But peace has a price, and I didn't realize how high it was until my nephew spat on my birthday cake. My family isn't evil, just entitled. My mom has this habit of rewriting history to make herself the hero. My sister Trina is her mirror image, dramatic, loud, and somehow always the victim no matter what happens. Then there's me, the responsible one, the one they call when something breaks, when bills pile up, when they need help just until next month. For a while, I didn't mind. I thought helping meant being loved. I thought family loyalty was supposed to work both ways. Turns out I was wrong. That birthday was supposed to be simple. I had planned a quiet dinner at my mom's house. Nothing fancy, just family. I even brought my own cake because I knew no one else would. It was a small thing, but it mattered to me. I'd been working crazy hours to help pay down some old family debts, and I figured for once, maybe I could have one evening that wasn't about fixing someone else's mess. Just one night where people showed up for me. Trina arrived half an hour late, dragging her 7-year-old son Milo, who was already clutching a tablet and chewing something loudly. "Sorry, we were busy," she said, breezing past me like she was arriving at a fan convention instead of her brother's birthday. You know how kids are. I smiled anyway because that's what I do. I said it was fine. I offered Milo some of the chips on the table. He ignored me. My mom came in from the kitchen drying her hands. "Oh, good. Everyone's here," she said cheerfully, though she clearly wasn't looking at me. Her eyes went straight to Trina. "Sweetheart, I made your favorite lasagna. It was my birthday, but apparently the menu was based on my sister's preferences." I didn't say anything. I'd learned long ago that pointing things out only made me sound ungrateful. So I sat down, listened to them talk about Trina's new business venture, which as usual involved her quitting her job to pursue her passion for something that wouldn't pay a cent, and tried to enjoy the evening. Every time I spoke, it felt like my words were background noise. When I mentioned a project I'd been promoted on, my mom said, "That's nice," and turned to ask Trina how her art journey was going. I tried to laugh it off, but something about the way Milo was kicking his feet against my chair made my jaw tighten. Dinner ended and I brought out the cake. Chocolate homemade, simple but good. I even wrote "Happy Birthday, Dale" on it myself. My mom clapped half-heartedly. Trina scrolled through her phone. And Milo? Well, he stared at it like it had personally offended him. I bent down to grab a knife when I heard the wet, unmistakable sound of spit. When I looked up, Milo's face was smug. There it was, a thick glob right on top of the frosting. "You don't deserve it anyway," he yelled, with that mean, bratty confidence only a kid who's never been told no could have. The room went silent for half a second, then burst into laughter. My mom laughed the loudest. "Oh my gosh, Milo, you're terrible," she said between giggles, not even pretending to scold him. Trina chuckled too, waving it off. "He's just playing Dale. Don't take it so seriously." I stood there, holding the knife, staring at the ruined cake, feeling heat crawl up my neck. I wanted to say something. I wanted to scream, but all I did was breathe and mutter, "It's fine." Because in this family, the moment you stand up for yourself, you're the problem. I tossed the cake into the trash and said I wasn't hungry anymore. My mom rolled her eyes. "Dale, you're being dramatic. He's a kid. You really need to lighten up." I didn't trust myself to speak, so I just grabbed my coat and left. On the drive home, I tried to convince myself it wasn't a big deal. But it wasn't about the cake. It was everything. Years of being dismissed, used, and laughed at the moment I showed a hint of hurt. I thought maybe I'd wake up the next day and it would all blow over. Instead, I got a text from my mom around midnight. "Dale, you really overreacted tonight. Milo's just a child and you need to stop taking things so personally. Maybe it's better if you don't come around for a while. It's exhausting walking on eggshells around your moods." That one hit me harder than I expected. Walking on eggshells around my moods. The same woman who called me every month to fix her bills. The same one whose phone I paid for because she forgot to cancel a data plan. I stared at that message for a long time. Not angry, not even sad, just tired. The kind of tired that sits deep in your bones and makes you realize some people will keep taking until you stop letting them. The next morning, something in me shifted. For years, I've been carrying their weight, financially, emotionally, everything. My mom's car loan in my name, Trina's credit card debt. I consolidated it so her credit wouldn't tank. Even the utilities at mom's house were under my account because the system's too confusing for her. I used to joke that I was the family's unpaid manager. But that morning, it didn't feel like a joke anymore. It felt like a chain. I sat at my desk with a cup of coffee and opened my laptop. I went through each account one by one. The car loan transfer form was already bookmarked. The utilities could be switched back in less than 10 minutes. Trina's debt consolidation. I'd warned her that if she missed one more payment, I'd remove my name. She'd missed 3. For once, I didn't hesitate. My fingers moved steadily. No anger, no revenge, just clarity. It was like setting down a heavy bag I'd been carrying for years. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't announce it or make a scene. I just clicked submit. By noon, everything was legally shifted. Every name, every bill, every consequence back where it belonged. It was strangely peaceful. For the first time in years, my finances were clean. My phone was silent. The quiet felt like freedom. But peace never lasts long in my family. Around 5 p.m., my phone started buzzing. First, it was a call from mom, then Trina, then mom again. By the time I checked, I had 12 missed calls and a wall of messages lighting up the screen. Dale, what did you do? Why are you being so petty? You're ruining everything. Call me back now. I just stared at the screen and let it ring. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about money. It was about control. And for the first time, they didn't have it. I leaned back in my chair, watching my phone light up with panic, and thought, maybe this was what peace actually looked like. But I had no idea that this was only the beginning. The next few days would turn everything upside down. I wasn't prepared for what they'd try next or how far they'd go to get back at me. The next morning, I woke up to 27 unread messages and a voicemail inbox full of my mother's voice. She'd left one at 3 o'clock in the morning, crying into the phone like I'd done something unspeakable. Dale, honey, please, we need to talk. You can't just do this to us. You're acting out of anger, and I know that's not who you are. Call me back, okay? We'll fix it together. That last word together made me laugh bitterly. Together was never really together in our family. It always meant me fixing what everyone else broke. I put the phone down, made coffee, and stared out the kitchen window for a long time, just listening to the quiet. My apartment felt still, like the world had stopped expecting something from me for once. Then my phone buzzed again. This time it was Trina. Her text popped up all caps. What is wrong with you? You can't just dump this on us. Mom is freaking out. I didn't reply. I just scrolled through the thread of old messages between us. Requests for money favors, promises to pay me back soon. Which of course never happened. I noticed how every conversation ended the same way. Me saying, don't worry about it, that had always been the problem. I never worried them enough. By noon, Mom finally got me on the phone. Her voice was shaky, but not the kind of shaky that comes from sadness. The kind that comes from someone who's used to getting their way. Dale, you need to put everything back right now. You've made such a mess, Mom. It's not a mess, I said, calm, but firm. I just put things back where they belong. The car is yours, the bills are yours, Trina's debt is hers. That's how it should have been all along. She scoffed like I told a joke. Don't you dare talk to me like that. You know I can't handle all this paperwork. You're so good with numbers, Dale. You always have been. You don't mind, right? Just help me one last time. One last time. I'd heard those words 100 times before. Every last time turned into another and another until the last time was a lifetime. I told her no. The silence on the other end was colder than I expected. You're being heartless, she finally said, her voice lowering. You know how much your sister struggles. You're abandoning your family for what? A few dollars. That was the moment I realized she wasn't crying over the money or the loans. She was crying because she'd lost control for her. My kindness had always been currency, and I just declared bankruptcy. That evening, I got home from work to find 3 missed calls from my aunt, 2 from my cousin, and 1 from a number I didn't recognize. Apparently, the family group chat had been revived for an emergency meeting me. My mom had sent a long paragraph about how I'd blindsided her and financially crippled the family out of spite. I could almost hear the gasps and pity rolling in through the screen. One cousin texted, "Hey man, I heard about what happened. Maybe just talk it out. She's your mom after all." Yeah, she was my mom, the same mom who laughed when her grandson spit on my cake. The next day, I stopped by her house, not to argue, just to pick up some of my old documents she'd been keeping for safekeeping. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed Trina's car already there. Figures. Mom opened the door before I could even knock. "Oh, so you do remember where we live?" she said, fake smiling like we were in some sitcom. Inside, the air was thick with tension and cheap perfume. Trina sat at the kitchen table, arms crossed, glaring at me like I'd stolen something. Milo was on the couch watching cartoons, completely oblivious. Mom went straight into her performance. We were just talking about you, Dale. I told Trina, you've been under a lot of stress lately. Maybe that's why you're acting out. Acting out, I repeated, my voice flat. Yes, she said, her tone suddenly tender, manipulative in that practiced way. You've always been so responsible, but you bottle things up. And when you finally explode, you hurt people. You've done that before, haven't you? She was rewriting the story again, making it sound like I was unstable, emotional, dangerous even. I leaned against the counter, trying to stay calm. Mom, I'm not exploding, I'm just done being taken advantage of. Trina laughed under her breath. You're seriously overreacting, Dale. Nobody's taking advantage of you. You act like we're criminals or something. Then why is everything in my name? I asked quietly. She rolled her eyes. Because you offered. Don't act like we forced you. You wanted to help. That stung more than I expected. She was right. I had offered. Back then, I thought helping them would earn some respect, maybe even appreciation. But in their minds, my generosity was just the baseline. Anything less than constant sacrifice felt like betrayal. I picked up the folder with my documents and turned to leave. I'm not arguing about this anymore. As I reached the door, Trina said something I'll never forget. You always think you're better than us, Dale. Just because you can pay bills and play hero doesn't mean you're some kind of saint. You're miserable, and you want everyone else to be too. I stopped hand on the doorknob. No, I said quietly. I just finally want to be happy without asking for permission. I left before she could respond. Over the next few days, things got worse. Mom stopped answering my texts entirely. My aunt sent a message saying I should apologize before things get permanent. I wasn't even sure what that meant. Then I found out Mom had gone to the bank claiming there was fraud on the accounts I'd closed. She tried to have the transfers reversed. The banker called me confused. Mr. Holloway, your mother's saying she never consented to the loan changes. Do you want to file a counterclaim? It took everything in me not to laugh out loud. My mom, the woman who begged me for years to handle her finances, now pretending she didn't know what I'd done for her. No, I said finally. I'll handle it privately. That night, I got a new message from Milo's school. Apparently, I was still listed as his emergency contact. I stared at that line for a while. Emergency contact. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd been their emergency contact my whole life. Whenever they messed up, whenever something went wrong, I was the number they called. I removed my name from the form the next morning. It felt like deleting a chapter of my life, but the silence that followed was deceptive. My family might have been quiet for a few days, but I could feel something brewing. They'd never handled being told no. I'd taken away the one thing they valued most, dependence. And people like that don't go down without a fight. The storm broke on a Sunday afternoon. I was at the grocery store when I saw Trina's car pull into the lot. My stomach dropped. She parked right next to me, got out, and marched over before I could even shut my door. We need to talk, she said sharply. I sighed. Can it wait? No, it can't. She looked around, then lowered her voice. Mom's losing it, Dale. She says she can't pay the bills and it's your fault. She's been calling the electric company every day begging for extensions. Do you know how humiliating that is for her? Maybe she should have thought about that before laughing in my face, I said quietly. Her eyes flashed. You're really going to throw that cake thing in our faces forever. He's a kid. I stepped closer, keeping my voice even. It's not about the cake. It's about how nobody cared. You laughed, Mom laughed, and when I finally drew a line, suddenly I'm the bad guy. She looked away, biting her lip. You know Mom doesn't mean to hurt you. She doesn't mean to, I said. She just does it anyway. For a second, something in her expression softened. Then it vanished. Whatever. Just fix this. Please. I can't deal with her crying anymore. I didn't respond. I just walked past her into the store. When I came out, she was gone. But there was a note under my windshield wiper. It was written in my mother's handwriting. You're tearing this family apart. I hope you're happy. No love, Mom. No please call. Just that. That night, I sat in my apartment staring at the note. For the first time, I felt something heavier than anger, grief. Not for them, but for the version of myself who kept believing they'd change. I thought about every time I'd stayed silent to keep the peace, every joke at my expense, every time they said I was too sensitive. Maybe I was. But maybe being sensitive just meant I'd finally started feeling what I should have felt years ago. Then came the final straw, the moment everything shifted from family drama to open war. I got home from work 2 days later to find an envelope taped to my door. Inside was a letter from a collections agency. Apparently, the car loan I transferred back to Mom had already defaulted. She hadn't made a single payment. And because she'd forgotten to update her contact info, the agency had listed my address as the point of correspondence. It wasn't even about the money anymore. It was the principle. They wanted me to feel responsible again. They wanted to remind me that no matter what I did, I'd never be free of their chaos. I set the letter on the table and stared at it for a long time. My heart pounding, not with fear this time, but with resolve. If they wanted a reminder of who I was, they were about to get one. And this time, I wasn't going to be the quiet one anymore. That was the night I decided enough was enough. I didn't know it yet, but the next move I made would change everything. And once it started, there'd be no going back. The letter from the collections agency sat on my kitchen table like a ghost I couldn't look away from. Every time I walked past it, I felt this mix of disbelief and exhaustion twisting in my chest. For years, I'd paid those bills without question. For years, I trusted that someday, just someday, they'd see everything I'd done for them and appreciate it. But that night, staring at that letter, I realized something that hit me like a punch to the gut. They didn't just take advantage of me. They relied on me being the fool who'd never stop. And when I finally stopped, they decided to punish me for it. 2 days later, I got another envelope. This one's certified mail. My first thought was that it was another collections notice. But when I opened it, my stomach dropped. It was from my mom's lawyer. Apparently, she'd filed a small claims case against me for financial misconduct and emotional distress. Emotional distress from the woman who told me not to come around anymore. The claim said I'd unlawfully removed financial support, which caused significant hardship to the household. There was a number attached to $114,600. That was supposedly the total of damages I'd caused by removing my name from her accounts. I sat down hard on the couch. I read it 3 times, thinking it had to be some kind of misunderstanding, but there it was in black and white. Holloway versus Holloway. My own mother suing me. I called her immediately, hands shaking. She picked up on the second ring. "Mom," I said, my voice tight. "What is this? You filed a lawsuit against me." There was a pause, then that calm, cold tone she always used when she wanted to sound innocent. "Oh, Dale, you left us no choice. You've created such a mess, and I can't afford to lose everything because of your little tantrum." "Tantrum?" I repeated, my voice breaking slightly. "You laughed in my face on my birthday, told me I was too sensitive, and now you're suing me." "I didn't laugh at you," she said sharply. "You're twisting things like you always do. I just want things to go back the way they were." "The way they were," I said, almost laughing. "Where I paid your bills and Trina's debts while you two treated me like the help." Her voice snapped. "Don't talk about your sister like that. She's going through a lot. She's been going through a lot for a decade," I said. "And somehow I'm always the one who pays for it. You're making this harder than it needs to be." She said, her tone shifting again, soft and rehearsed. "If you just fix what you broke, I'll drop the case." There it was, the manipulation I knew too well. Not an olive branch, a leash. "I'm not fixing anything," I said finally. The word steady, even though my hands weren't. "You started this. You deal with it." Her silence lasted a full 5 seconds before she hung up. I sat there in my quiet apartment, staring at the phone screen, feeling something inside me break. Not anger, not sadness, just a hollow kind of disappointment that felt worse than either. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't even about the lawsuit. It was about what it meant. My mom had always made excuses, always guilt-tripped me. But deep down, I thought she loved me in her own warped way. But this was her saying, "I'll destroy you if it means getting my way." And as twisted as it sounds, that clarity was freeing. The following week was a blur of paperwork and phone calls. I spoke to an attorney who couldn't hide his surprise when I explained what was happening. "You're being sued by your mother," he said, flipping through the documents, "for not paying her bills." "Pretty much," I said. He shook his head slowly. "I've seen family disputes over inheritance property custody, but this is new." We went over the details together. Most of the accounts had clear documentation that the loans and utilities were originally under my name as a favor, not as joint ownership. That worked in my favor legally, but emotionally, it was a nightmare. Every email, every form I signed years ago trying to help them, it all came back to haunt me. The court date was set for 3 weeks later. I didn't tell anyone at work what was going on. How could I? Hey guys, can't make the meeting. My mom's suing me for being too responsible, but somehow they found out anyway. It started small. One coworker mentioning that Trina had posted something on Facebook about family betrayal. I didn't have Facebook, but a friend sent me screenshots. There it was, a long, melodramatic post about how some people think money makes them better than everyone else and how family means nothing to those who only care about control. The comment section was full of sympathy. So sorry you're going through that, Trina. You deserve better, girl. Stay strong. Some brothers just don't get it. My name wasn't mentioned, but everyone knew who she meant. Then came the kicker. My mom commented underneath, "Proud of you for speaking your truth." I think that was the first time in my life I actually felt hatred toward them. Not anger, not frustration, pure quiet hatred, because it wasn't enough for them to use me. Now they were painting me as the villain to everyone else. The next time I saw my mom was at the pre-trial mediation. She walked into the room wearing a soft pink sweater and that fake gentle smile she always used in front of strangers. Trina was with her, looking smug and self-righteous. The mediator tried to start with pleasantries, but it went downhill fast. "Mrs. Holloway," the mediator said kindly, "it seems your son was helping you manage these accounts voluntarily, correct?" My mom sighed dramatically. "At first, yes, but he promised to keep helping. It was an agreement between us." I looked up sharply. "No, it wasn't. You begged me to take them on because you didn't want late fees." She didn't even look at me. "You see how he talks to me? This is exactly what I'm dealing with." "He's aggressive, controlling," Trina chimed in. "He's always been like this. He thinks he's the only one who works hard." I clenched my jaw, trying to stay calm. "You both called me whenever you needed money. You laughed when Milo spit on my cake. Then you told me I was too sensitive for leaving." Mom gasped like I'd slapped her. "How dare you bring up a child? He's 7. The mediator raised a hand. "Let's keep this civil, please." It went on like that for nearly an hour. Every time I spoke, my mom twisted it into something cruel. Every boundary I'd ever tried to set was painted as emotional abuse. Every favor I'd ever done became control tactics. When it ended, the mediator turned to me privately. "I can't say this on record, but walk away from them. Whatever happens, it's not worth your sanity." I nodded. I already knew that, but my mom wasn't done yet. A few nights later, I got home to find a voicemail from my landlord. "Hey, Dale, just giving you a heads up. Your sister called earlier, said you might be behind on rent and that we should check in." I told her everything's fine, but yeah, just letting you know. I called him back immediately. "She what?" "Yeah, said she was your emergency contact. Weird, right? Weird." Didn't even begin to cover it. They weren't just trying to ruin my finances now, they were trying to smear me to everyone around me. I checked my credit report that night, and sure enough, 2 inquiries had been made under my name in the last 48 hours. I hadn't applied for anything. I froze. They were trying to open new accounts in my name again. That was when something inside me went completely still. I didn't feel panic anymore, just a cold, steady kind of calm. I gathered every document, every message, every screenshot I'd kept over the years. I called my lawyer the next morning and told him I wanted to countersue, not just for damages, but for identity fraud and harassment. He hesitated for a second. "That's a serious move." "So is trying to destroy your own son," I said quietly. By that point, my mother is a sweet old lady. Mask was slipping fast. Her text turned nastier, accusing me of being ungrateful, heartless, even possessed by greed. Trina followed suit, sending me a message that said, "I hope you realize Mom's not going to live forever. You're going to regret this." That one stone. Not because it was true, but because it was the kind of emotional grenade they'd always used to keep me in line. Guilt, shame, fear. But not this time. The night before the court date, I sat in my apartment surrounded by paperwork, old bank statements, receipts, messages, proof of every sacrifice they'd conveniently forgotten. For years, I kept everything just in case. Now I finally knew why. Still, when I looked at her name on the case file, plaintiff Carol Holloway, a part of me still felt that ache. No matter how toxic she was still my mother. And for some pathetic reason, I still hoped she'd walk into that courtroom the next day and say, "I'm sorry, Dale. Let's stop this." But deep down, I already knew she wouldn't. Because for people like her, love was just another form of leverage. And the next morning, she'd prove it in a way that would break whatever pieces of trust one had left. What she did next made the lawsuit look like a slap on the wrist. I didn't sleep the night before the hearing. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, my mom's, rehearsing that sweet, fragile act she always pulled in front of others. The way she'd tilt her head slightly, clutch her purse, and speak in that soft, trembling voice that made her sound like the victim of every situation. I knew that version of her was going to show up in court, and I knew exactly how convincing she could be. By the time the sun came up, I'd stopped pacing and just sat on the edge of my bed staring at the floor. I wasn't scared of losing money anymore. I was scared of what I was about to lose emotionally. The last bit of faith that maybe deep down we were still a family. The courtroom was small, the kind you'd expect for local cases. Pale yellow walls, wooden benches, that faint echo of footsteps when someone entered. My mom was already there when I walked in, sitting next to Trina. She was wearing a navy cardigan and clutching a tissue she didn't need yet. Trina glanced up when she saw me, then leaned in to whisper something to Mom. They both nodded. My lawyer, Daniel, greeted me quietly. "You ready?" "Not really," I said. He gave a sympathetic half smile. "Just stick to the facts. Don't let her bait you emotionally." That was easier said than done. When the session started, Mom spoke first. Her voice was calm but tearful, perfectly balanced between heartbreak and dignity. "Your Honor, I love my son," she began. "But over the past few months, he's made choices that have caused a great deal of harm to me and my daughter. We trusted him with our finances because he insisted on handling them. We never asked him to, but when he decided to walk away, he left us drowning. We can't afford to live like this." I sat there listening numb. She wasn't even lying outright. She was twisting the truth just enough that it sounded believable. That was her gift. When it was my turn, I kept my voice even. "Your Honor, I took over those accounts because my mother asked me to. There are years of messages showing her requests. When I stopped, I transferred everything legally back into their names. Nothing was taken. I didn't touch a cent that wasn't mine." The judge asked a few questions. My lawyer presented the paperwork. Everything checked out. On paper, I was fine, but emotionally, I was wrecked. When the hearing ended, the judge didn't make a final ruling that day. We'd get it in writing later. As soon as we stepped out, I saw Trina smirking near the exit. "You really had to drag Mom through this, huh?" she said under her breath. "She sued me," I said quietly. She shrugged. "She wouldn't have if you hadn't abandoned her." That word again, abandoned. Like I was supposed to carry their lives forever. I didn't respond. I just walked past them. That was the lowest I'd felt in years. Not because of the lawsuit, but because standing there watching them walk away arm in arm, I realized I didn't have a family anymore. I'd been holding on to the idea of one pretending that if I just did enough, gave enough, endured enough, they'd eventually see me as more than their safety net. But they never would. That night, I got home, took off my jacket, and just sat in silence. My apartment was dark, except for the glow of the city outside my window. My phone buzzed twice. Once from my landlord reminding me about the new lease renewal, and once from an unknown number. I opened it. "Hey Dale, this is Rebecca from HR. Just wanted to confirm your meeting tomorrow about your work conduct. See you then." My stomach dropped. Work conduct, I hadn't done anything wrong. I opened my email and there it was, an official notice from HR, saying a complaint had been filed about me harassing a family member at the workplace. My company had strict anti-harassment policies. I didn't even work with my family, but apparently the complaint included online harassment through social media and communication channels. I didn't even have social media. Then I saw the attached evidence. Screenshots of messages, fake ones, text conversations that looked like I'd been sending threatening messages to my sister. "You'll regret this. I'll ruin you. Don't cross me again." They were convincing too. The profile picture matched mine. My heart pounded so hard I thought I might pass out. I could tell they'd used one of those fake number apps. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. This was sabotage. The next morning, I walked into work half asleep and half in disbelief. The HR rep, Rebecca, was kind but distant. "We just need to clarify some details, Dale. It's probably a misunderstanding. I told her everything, that I hadn't sent those messages, that my family was retaliating because I cut them off financially." Thankfully, she believed me enough to hold off on any disciplinary action until they investigated, but the humiliation of even sitting there explaining it, I can't describe it. I felt exposed, like my private pain had been dragged into every corner of my life. That night, I didn't even turn the lights on when I got home. I just collapsed on the couch. I thought about everything, every Christmas gift I bought them, every time I'd skipped a vacation to pay one of their bills. Every night I'd listen to Mom cry about how hard it is being alone while she ignored the fact that she'd made me feel lonelier than anyone ever could. I don't know how long I sat there, but at some point I realized I was crying. Not loud, not messy, just quiet tears I didn't even notice until one hit the back of my hand. For the next week, I went through the motions. Work, home, sleep, repeat. My lawyer told me the case was leaning in my favor, but I barely cared. Even winning wouldn't change what I'd lost. Then one evening, I got a message from an unknown number again. Just one line. You should have stayed in your place. No name, no context, just that. I blocked the number, but something in my gut told me it was from them. I started noticing small things after that. My mail opened when it arrived. My car door slightly ajar when I knew I'd locked it. Nothing big enough to prove, but enough to make me look over my shoulder. That's when I realized I couldn't live like this anymore. So I started quietly planning. Not revenge yet, just escape. I canceled my lease renewal. I started transferring my savings into a new account under a different bank. I deleted every shared account or subscription that had my old email. I sold my car within a week and started biking to work. Every step I took, I felt lighter, like I was peeling their grip off me one layer at a time. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing, not even my friends. I just kept moving silently. One night, while packing a box of old files, I found an old photo album my mom had given me years ago. It was filled with childhood pictures, birthdays, family trips, holidays. In one of them, I was about 10, holding a slice of cake while Mom and Trina stood behind me smiling. The same smiles they probably wore when Milo spit on my cake decades later. That realization hit harder than I expected. The roles hadn't changed. I'd just gotten older. I closed the album and put it aside. I wasn't going to throw it away. Not yet. But I wasn't keeping it out where I could see it either. As the days passed, I found a kind of strange peace in my quiet withdrawal. My coworkers noticed I was calmer. I wasn't snapping, wasn't venting. I was just done. I didn't check my phone as much. I stopped waiting for apologies that would never come. I started waking up earlier, making coffee for myself instead of rushing out the door half distracted. The world didn't change overnight, but my mind did. Then one morning, my lawyer called. Dale, he said, the case is officially closed. The court dismissed her claim entirely. I didn't feel joy or triumph, just relief, a soft, tired kind of relief that felt more like breathing after being underwater for too long. But even with that victory, I knew the damage was done. My family wasn't just broken. They'd made sure there was no going back. And as if to confirm it that evening, my mom sent one last message. I hope you're proud. You've destroyed this family. No apology, no love, just blame like always. I didn't reply. I stared at the message, then deleted the entire thread. That night, I sat on my balcony watching the city lights flicker. And for the first time in my life, I realized I didn't owe anyone anything anymore. Not love, not money, not explanations. But as the cold wind brushed against my face, another thought crept in. Quiet, steady, and sharp. Maybe I didn't owe them anything, but they still owed me. And for once in my life, I wasn't going to let that go. That was the night I stopped being the quiet one. The night I started planning my next move. The morning after deleting my mom's final message, I woke up with the strangest feeling. Peace mixed with purpose. For years, I'd been surviving on guilt and obligation. Now, for the first time, I felt something else. Control. Not the kind of control my family accused me of having, but the kind that comes from knowing no one can pull your strings anymore. The first change I made was small. I switched my phone number. It felt symbolic, like cutting the last frayed thread that still tied me to them. No more late-night guilt trips. No more emergency calls, just silence. It was beautiful. Then I moved. A new apartment across town, smaller but brighter, with big windows that overlooked a quiet park. I furnished it with my own money. Every piece chosen for me, not for what would impress Mom. I remember sitting on the floor surrounded by half-assembled furniture, eating takeout from a plastic box, and realizing I was happier than I'd ever been at a table full of people who didn't respect me. Work, too, started to shift. My boss had caught wind of the HR mess and called me in expecting the worst. Instead, after hearing the truth, she offered me a promotion. You've handled yourself with composure through all this, she said. We could use someone like you managing the new accounts. It wasn't just a step up. It was a new chapter. A bigger office, a better salary, a sense that all the quiet suffering I'd endured had somehow hardened into calm confidence. Money wasn't my goal, but I won't lie, it helped. Within a few months, I'd paid off the last of my own debts, built an emergency fund, and started investing. Every paycheck I didn't have to share with my family felt like reclaiming another piece of myself. They still tried to reach me, of course, through distant relatives, old friends, even one of my coworkers. Your mom's not doing well, they'd say. Train is struggling. But I didn't take the bait anymore. I didn't even respond with anger. I just said I hope they figure it out, and went back to my day. That calm, detached version of me scared them more than any argument ever could. I started working out again, eating better, sleeping more. The tension that used to sit in my shoulders, the one that came from constantly waiting for someone to need something, was gone. Even my coworkers noticed the change. "You seem different, Dale." One of them said, "Lighter." "Yeah," I said simply. I stopped trying to fix people who enjoy being broken. Still, part of me wondered what they were saying about me now. Curiosity, not concern. So one weekend, I made the mistake of checking Trina's Facebook again through a friend's account. The post had gotten worse. She'd turned my silence into a saga. "Some people abandon their family the moment they get money," she'd written. "But karma always finds its way back." The comments were the usual chorus of sympathy. My mom had even shared one of them with the caption, "Some wounds never heal." I laughed for once. It didn't hurt. It just felt pathetic. I closed the browser and focused on something that did matter myself. I started volunteering at a local community center, helping people with financial planning. It was ironic, really. I'd spent years managing the mess of people who didn't care. Now I was teaching people who actually wanted to learn. One of the coordinators there, Jenna, was kind and sharp-witted. We got along easily, and before long, she was more than a co-worker. It wasn't a whirlwind romance. It was calm, steady, real. She asked questions because she cared, not because she wanted something. When I told her bits and pieces about my family, she didn't flinch or try to fix it. She just said, "You did the right thing." Sometimes the best way to love people like that is from a distance. That line stuck with me. Months passed. The lawsuit faded into memory. The fake messages had been erased from HR records, and the silence from my family became the new normal. But one night, an email popped up that made my stomach tighten. It was from my old bank, the one I'd closed after transferring everything back. The subject line read, "Unusual Activity Alert." When I opened it, I saw something I hadn't expected. Someone had tried to reopen one of the accounts in my name. They'd failed, but it triggered a notification. I clicked the attached report and saw the address used on the application. It wasn't mine, it was my mom's. For a few seconds, I just stared at the screen. Then I felt that familiar calm settle over me again. The kind that used to mean defeat, but now meant strategy. They were still trying to use me, still trying to drag me back. But this time I wasn't angry. I was patient because this time I had something they didn't. Stability, proof, and power. Over the next few weeks, I quietly built a case file. Not to sue, not yet, but to document every attempt, every piece of manipulation, every trace of their interference. I wanted to be ready not just to defend myself, but to end this once and for all. Meanwhile, life kept improving. My savings grew, my work thrived. I was happier than I'd ever been, even as I kept my guard up. Then one afternoon, I got a call from an old family friend, Mrs. Carter, who used to live down the street from my mom. She sounded hesitant. "Dale, honey, I don't want to stir things, but your mom's been telling people something strange." "What is it?" I asked, though I already had a bad feeling. "She's saying you stole from her, that you drained her accounts and left her with nothing." People are starting to believe it. I leaned back in my chair, eyes narrowing, so that's how it was going to be. If she couldn't win legally, she'd try to destroy my reputation socially. "Thank you for telling me," I said. "I appreciate it." When I hung up, I didn't feel panic. I felt ready because this time, I wasn't just going to protect myself. I was going to make sure every lie they told came back to them with receipts attached. That was the moment the idea started forming in my head. The plan that would turn everything they'd done against them perfectly quietly and legally. The plan that would make them finally understand what it feels like to lose everything they took for granted. I didn't know it then, but the rise wasn't just about getting my life back. It was about preparing for the fall, theirs. The revenge didn't arrive like a thunderclap. It arrived like a series of small, unglamorous dominoes. I set up and nudged with my own two hands. Paperwork, phone calls, a handful of people who still believed facts mattered. I didn't want fireworks. I wanted clean, unavoidable consequences that would force them to look at what they'd built on top of me and see it for what it was. First, I tightened the legal screws. Daniel helped me file a countersuit, defamation, harassment, identity theft. We packaged everything. Bank logs showing the attempts to open accounts in my name, the fake screenshots used to trigger HR copies of the certified mail from my mother's lawyer, and the small claims filing that never belonged on a mother's desk. More important than the emotion of it all was the trail. Timestamps, IP addresses, signatures, bank officers' notes, a stack of paper that spoke in a voice no amount of acting could drown out. We filed a criminal complaint for identity fraud, too. That decision felt oddly righteous. They'd weaponized my identity to smear me and to try and drag my livelihood down. Turning that over to the right people was the closest thing I had to truth as a sword. The detective assigned to the case was deliberate and quiet. Every question he asked felt like a new stone I could finally put down. He said it bluntly. If they'd used forged documents or spoofed numbers, there would be consequences beyond the civil case. While the legal process does the heavy lifting, I built a perimeter around myself. I added fraud alerts at the credit agencies, frozen my credit profile, forwarded all suspicious activity to the bank's fraud department. I handed over the evidence of the fake messages to HR and the company's IT team. They traced the origin of the fake account to an app that allowed caller ID spoofing. The HR complaint was quietly dropped once they had proof. People at work who'd glanced at the rumor feed now either apologized quietly or pretended they never saw anything. That was fine by me. If the legal actions were the foundation of the plan, the next moves were about consequences that hit where it actually mattered to them: control and reputation. I found out Trina was in the middle of trying to get investors for her little consulting hobby come business. It wasn't a big operation, more like a string of hopeful messages and bad invoices. I contacted one of the potential investors she'd been courting and calmly and professionally laid out the financials and the facts. Invoices that didn't add up, promises without contracts, and the almost comical gap between what she pitched and what she actually delivered. The investor pulled out. The single client who'd been on the fence withdrew as well when I handed them bank statements showing overdue payments and bounce checks related to Trina's setup. It hurt her where she wanted validation by proving nothing there was real. I didn't go to the neighbors or post screenshots in public. I let institutions do the revealing, banks, the police, lawyers, the investor. But word travels and institutions whisper in the right ears. Mrs. Carter, the neighbor who'd always given Mom the benefit of the doubt, called me after she'd seen a formal notice from the bank flagged for fraud. I didn't want to believe, she said, voice small. But when I saw those documents, I'm sorry, Dale. Her apology was quiet, and it cut deeper than any argument because it didn't need to be loud to be true. The financial dominoes started to fall in their own bureaucratic way. The car that Trina kept promising she'd pay off went into arrears. The finance company sent notices and then began the wheels toward repossession, not because I arranged it, but because the debts were real and unattended, and the lender did what lenders do. Utilities at my mother's house got shut off after several missed notices. The providers couldn't keep sending service without payment. Her "I can't handle paperwork" got translated into missed payments and late fees. Banks froze flagged accounts pending investigation. The small social scaffolding they'd built, friends who lent money, neighbors who covered for them, started to step back when paperwork and bank letters showed up on their doorsteps. People hate being taken for granted more than they hate being lied to. My favorite part wasn't the losses themselves, but how calm I was when they came. I didn't gloat. I didn't send taunting texts. I let the system and the evidence do the talking. When Trina called me the night her client dropped and cried about how unfair it was, I listened for 5 minutes before saying simply, "Then don't do what's unfair." Her voice went quiet. "You could have helped," she said. "Why didn't you?" I answered honestly, "Because helping you had become the same as keeping you on a path that hurt you and everyone around you. I wanted to be done." She hung up. The most satisfying moment was not a dramatic confrontation, but a legal one. In mediation with the judge's clerk present and our lawyers across from each other, my attorney laid out the evidence of identity fraud and defamation. The prosecutor assigned to the criminal complaint called Mom in for questioning. The detective had already matched the spoof number to a pattern of calls originating from a purchased app, and the signature on one of the bank forms did not match the natural flow of her handwriting. When the prosecutor looked across at my mother, her confident, rehearsed pleas began to fray. There's nothing theatrical about watching someone's armor crack because the hard records do not lie. The mediator asked my mom if she had any documentation to counter the claims, and she had nothing that could counter timestamps and IP logs. The small claims case she brought folded like bad origami in front of the countersuit evidence. I expected rage theatrics, maybe a desperate public speech. Instead, there was a thin, stunned silence, then a string of appeals and attempts to settle. They offered to withdraw their statements if I would sign a mutual non-disparagement agreement. They begged me to think of the children and think of all we've done together. I told them calmly that they should have thought of those things before they weaponized my name. The legal end results weren't about bankrupting them. I never wanted to destroy the people who raised me. I wanted accountability. The court ordered Trina to pay restitution to the creditors for certain misapplied funds and required her to attend financial counseling as part of a plea agreement for the identity fraud charges. Mom was officially reprimanded for submitting forged documents, and there was a formal notation in the record that would make banks and other institutions cautious going forward. The defamation suit settled quietly with a public retraction and a small symbolic sum that I donated to the community center where I volunteered because I wanted the money to fix something instead of punish. The criminal case led to a caution and community service for Mom and an admission of guilt from Trina on a couple of counts. That part never felt like justice exactly, but it felt like consequence. After the legal dust settled, I was standing in my kitchen when my sister's neighbor, the very one who always baked for holidays, walked into my apartment with an envelope. She looked uncomfortable, hands twisting the paper. "She sent this," she said. "She wanted you to have it." Inside was a stack of old notes, childhood scribbles, a postcard with a crooked drawing of a house, a faded school photo, tokens of a past that for a moment made my chest ache in a way the court records never would. I could have thrown them away. I could have used them in some final dramatic reveal at a family dinner. Instead, I made tea, sat down, and held those pieces of paper like evidence that people had been more complicated than their worst moments. I left the envelope on the counter, then walked out onto my small balcony to breathe. Revenge had been clinical and careful, and it had worked. I'd reclaimed my life, my name, and my peace. Trina's business dissolved under the weight of unpaid invoices and pulled investments. Mom's social circle shifted. Some people cut ties, some never stopped, but the easiest illusions were gone. And yet, even standing in a brighter apartment with a better job and a calmer heart, I felt something else moving in the air. The subtle, dangerous sense that when you take away someone's dependence, they sometimes reach for things you can't predict. A week after everything settled, a plain white envelope arrived in my mailbox with no return address. Inside was a single page. No signature, no name, just 3 lines. "You think the papers and the courts change anything?" We didn't start with money. We started with the truth you can't see. Don't get comfortable. I read it twice, then folded it and put it on the table next to the old school photo. My hands weren't shaking. I felt more curious than afraid, like a chess player being told the opponent still had pieces left on the board. I didn't know who had sent it. It could have been Mom Trina or someone else entirely. The letter was a reminder that consequences often ripple further than you expect. I set the page under a paperweight and made a plan. The detective had been thorough and methodical. I'd keep copies of everything in a safe deposit box. I told Jenna about it. She rolled her eyes but agreed it was worth a call to the police to note the threat. Daniel said we should keep a log. And yet as the sun went down and the city's lights blinked awake, a small private part of me smiled. The last months had taught me that I was not built to be walked over. I had patience, paper trails, and the law. And more importantly, I had the ability to be precise when it mattered. So I sat there with the school photo and the anonymous note and thought about the next move. They'd certainly felt the fall. They'd been forced to stand in a room full of people who'd seen the paperwork, but the note meant they weren't finished, and neither was I. I poured another cup of tea. There was more to do. Clean up boundaries, maybe even more careful disclosures to make sure they couldn't use innocent people as shields again. I also knew one hard fact. Getting them to feel a fraction of the uncertainty and exposure I'd lived with for so long wasn't enough. If I wanted this to be truly over, it would have to be final and complete. And that meant patience and an even cooler hand. The night deepened. I put the photo back in the envelope and slid it into my desk drawer. Then I opened a new document and began listing options: legal, practical, humane. The game had changed from reaction to strategy. Somewhere down the list, I typed a question I didn't know the answer to yet. What would finish this for both of us in a way that didn't leave open the chance of more anonymous notes? Before I could decide, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number again. The fallout was not cinematic. It was slow, bureaucratic, and utterly final in the ways that matter most. Paperwork, phone calls, quiet doors that never opened again. The courts did their part. Trina's plea agreement and restitution orders were on the record. Mom's forged documents became part of a small criminal file, and the defamation claim ended with a retraction and a small payment I redirected to the community center. Banks flagged accounts, lenders closed lines, and the few friends who'd stood between me and the truth drifted away from them once the evidence landed on their kitchen tables. That isolation was sharper than any fine or court decision. People who had once answered every frantic call stopped answering. People who'd lent them goodwill suddenly preferred to keep their distance. Consequence arrived in the mundane ways that hurt: missed invitations, polite avoidance at neighborhood events, a business card that no one called. Trina lost the clients she was courting. Reputations and small businesses run on trust. And once someone checks the records and sees unpaid invoices and inconsistent paperwork, that trust dries up fast. She was ordered to pay restitution, which meant tiny, painful payments stretched out over years, enough to make the reality of consequences unavoidable. She also had to attend financial counseling and community service as part of the agreement. The court hoped it was rehabilitation. I hoped it was accountability. Either way, she couldn't slip back into the same pattern of borrowing prestige without responsibility. My mother's consequences were quieter but no less real. The prosecutor's caution and the formal notation about forged documents didn't make for a dramatic headline in our small town, but it changed the way institutions handled her. Banks required stricter ID checks. Neighbors were less hospitable when she asked for favors. And the calls for emergency help slowed to a trickle because people were wary of getting entangled. A few old friends stopped by once and then never called again. Those were the losses that cut. The social currency she'd built on sympathy evaporated when the paperwork spoke louder than the practiced tremble in her voice. She had to reckon with living within the bounds of what she could actually manage. No more asking others to carry her burdens while she kept the applause. The anonymous note, the detective tracked it. Nothing dramatic, just patient work. A purchase on camera, a pattern of small transactions tied to an account that ultimately led back to Trina. She denied it at first, then broke when the counselor required honesty as part of her program. The confession wasn't cinematic. It was a soft, awful thing. A small voice saying she'd been scared of being exposed and had lashed out. That didn't erase the damage. It did, however, make the ledger complete. She'd lied. She tried to drag me down. And when the trail closed, there was nowhere left for her to hide. For a while after everything settled, I felt oddly unmed. I'd spent decades building myself around the needs of people who never intended to carry me if the roles were reversed. When those roles dissolved, there was a strange silence I hadn't prepared for. Friends stepped in where family stepped out. Jenna stayed. She didn't treat me like a case study or a cautionary tale. She treated me like a partner. We started small things together, weekend bike rides, cooking dinners, quiet conversations where no one asked me for money or an alibi. She helped me relearn boundaries as a practice, not a punishment. Practically, I closed accounts, froze credit, and started an email filter that made nasty notes go into oblivion. I gave up the idea of dramatic revenge long ago. The legal and social consequences had been enough to stop the momentum of their manipulation. I donated the settlement to the community center with a note for people learning to stand on their own 2 feet. The director hugged me in a way I'd never been hugged by family. No strings, no ledger, just gratitude. I set up a small scholarship for financial literacy workshops so people like Trino wouldn't be tempted by fast promises, and so others could learn the tools I'd once used to bail people out of trouble. There were people who still asked why I'd pressed the charges, why I hadn't simply forgiven and moved on. The answer felt simple and true. Forgiveness without change was just permission for the same harm to happen again. Accountability didn't mean I wanted revenge for revenge's sake. It meant I wanted a future where I did not have to be the family's perpetual safety net because someone else felt fragile. I wanted to sleep without waiting for a call at 3 o'clock in the morning begging for cash. I wanted my name to mean me. When the last hearing wrapped and the judge gave the final paperwork, I stood in the hallway and watched my mother and sister talk. Small private words, the kind that would never reach me. They wore exhaustion like old coats. I felt something for them. Not warmth, not reconciliation, but a quiet pity. It's a strange grief to no longer be the person who fixes everything. It is also a strange relief. I'm not naive. People are complicated and will continue to make mistakes. But the thing that used to define my life being everyone's fallback ended not with fireworks, but with forms and consequences and honest bookkeeping. I kept the childhood photo Trina's neighbor handed me and placed it in a drawer. Some memories belong to the past. Some are lessons. The final thing I did was simple. I walked to the park near my apartment one quiet evening with Jenna sat on a bench and watched 2 kids chase each other around the grass. One of them tripped and looked up, eyes wet but smiling, and the other ran back to help. I felt a slow warmth spread through me that wasn't because I'd won anything or because anyone had been properly punished enough. It was because I'd finally reached a place where I could be generous without being used kind, without being taken and available, without being owned. I closed the chapter the way I'd always wanted to, quietly, with proof in my hands and a future I chose for myself. The last line of the story I told myself that night was short and true. I had not only reclaimed my name, I had finally kept